Will you pray with me once more? Gracious God, we do give you thanks for the gift of your word, for the gift of your spirit, for the gift of your guidance and help. As we have read from your word and now we seek to interpret it, O God, be with us. Guide us, help us, and protect us, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together might be acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I toyed with calling this story is filled with highly improbable scenarios, but I decided that was too strong. But this story, this very familiar story about the call of the earliest disciples, as told in Luke, is rich with things that if we read like a little bit of a cynical person, should make us go, yeah, that wouldn't happen. Yeah, that's not going to happen. There's no way that's going to happen. You should say it like 5, 6, 7 times. In fact, pretty much every sentence is filled with an improbable scenario. For starters, Jesus shows up on the side of a lake and crowds of people show up to hear him in a time in the gospel where almost no one has really heard of him yet. If you took a left and went back to Luke chapter 4, what you would find was Jesus had just been baptized, went out into the desert where he experienced his temptation, and he came back to begin his ministry. And the first thing that happens, even though he hasn't really done anything, is a crowd of people are surrounding him. Because I know that's how it worked when I started preaching. When nobody had heard of me, a crowd of people showed up. Let's see what this knucklehead's got to say. Not so much. Not that I'm equating me with Jesus. Please don't go there. Meanwhile, in this scenario, so this crowd of people with no explanation why shows up, so much so that Jesus is falling out into the water now and has to get in a boat. A fisherman's boat. A fisherman that is cleaning his nets, presumably a little bit away from his boat, who just says, oh yeah, sure, jump on in. You can use my boat. I don't mind. That's just my livelihood. This would be akin in our modern tradition to an independent, non-affiliated truck driver saying, yeah, jump on in, take it for a spin. I don't care. It wouldn't happen. Then, as we continue on our journey of improbable scenarios, it says in the Gospel of Luke, and he began to teach, and we get nothing of what he teaches. Now, I know you are all very astute readers of Scripture, and you already caught that. But that should make you stop and go, wait, what? In a gospel filled with speeches, with teachings, with Jesus talking almost nonstop. If you've got a red letter edition, look at Luke, and you'll see a whole bunch of red words. And in this scenario where Jesus has a crowd, nothing. Not a word. Wait, what? That should disturb our minds, should catch our attention. The story is clearly not about the teaching then. So, what is the story about? I'm going to wait for an answer. Come on, who's feeling brave? What is the story about?
The second miracle.
A second miracle. Okay, not bad. And what Ron is referring to is the first miracle, as we tend to attribute our timelines, was the turning of water into wine, and the second one being this miraculous catch of fish, which I hear what you're saying. I don't think that's what the story is about at all.
Recruiting apostles?
Arguably recruiting apostles, but I'm still not sure that's the real miracle here. Y'all can quit guessing now, or we'll lose all our time to that. I think the real miracle here is the amazing response that Jesus commands based on nothing. We tend to read this story and we focus on Simon's and his brother and then his business partners James and John response after the miracle. But the response actually happens well before the miracle comes. Simon says yes to Jesus before Jesus does a darn thing for him. Uh-oh. Now I think I know where he's going, and this is going to turn into preaching. Saying yes to Jesus after Jesus provides you a miracle is easy. Saying yes to Jesus before anything that you know of has happened requires significant faith. I know most of you, and I know most of you fairly well. And I don't know a lot of stories of miraculous transformations in your life that brought you to faith in Jesus Christ. I know I certainly didn't experience any. My miraculous transformation was the miracle that my parents managed to get me up and keep bringing me to church week in and week out. Right? I was raised in the church. I was raised by the church. I was raised to be a person of faith. If anything, the miracle came after I said yes to Jesus and began to become more aware of the little daily miracles that happen. But before I go too far down this road, let's keep going with our improbable scenarios, because there's a few more I want to tackle. So Jesus finishes teaching nothing, apparently, and then goes out into the lake, now suddenly with the fishermen who were mending their nets, but at least were cynical enough to come on over and be with their boat. You know, the text doesn't tell us this, but arguably Simon not only pushed out a little, but actually got in the boat, right? Because otherwise we would have a story of them coming and jumping in the boat to take him out to go fishing. But, so apparently he stayed with his boat, which makes some sense. That's probably the only probable scenario in this story. Then Jesus says, go out into the deeper water and cast your nets. And they catch this miraculous catch of fish, right? The net is so full that when they try to pull it up, they need a second boat. And then as they dump all the fish into both boats begin to sink. Not that the story deals with those sinking crafts at all. That's just kind of ignored and left for us to wonder about. But then again, I guess it doesn't matter because they walk away from their business anyway, right? At the end of the story. Which means maybe the boats just did sink. Who cares? We don't need those boats anymore. And then there's the catch itself. I can't count the times I've had discussions with people of all ages about the likelihood that professional fishermen would not be able to catch at all, and then suddenly there are fish. This is truly miraculous. That suddenly there are fish when there had been none. They wouldn't have just missed them, right? These are professionals. They know what they're doing. And yet, the notion that there are so many that they need help and the nets begin to tear and the response is such that the nets don't fail before help can get in their boat, get out there, come and help and lift, and then fill two boats doesn't add up. Which is to say, this is a story that has less to do with the miracle of the catching of the fish, and now I'm back to that point, more to do with the response to Jesus. Now, if we stop and think about this story for a minute, not just one, Simon, has responded to Jesus, but now at least four, right? Because now we have Simon, Andrew, James, and John all realizing that this is someone to say yes to. And as they say yes, or after they say yes, is when they experience the incredible blessings. Early on in the contemporary Christian music movement, which arguably has been happening throughout history, but the one that I think of when I think of that really started launching in the 70s and 80s. The core formula for songs, and this has kind of shifted out, was basically, my life was horrible, I found Jesus, everything was great. And if you do it, it'll be great for you too. That was kind of the core theme of the early contemporary Christian music movement songs. And as a young, developing, starting to wrestle with becoming a minister at that time, I found myself saying, yeah, but what if it didn't? What if things don't get great immediately? We have a story here where for Simon, a really horrible night became fantastic, like that. And I wonder when we tell those stories if we create an unrealistic expectation. Let's just take a quick non-scientific poll. When Jesus became a significant part of your life, did your life become perfect and sunshine and roses? Just go ahead and raise your hand. Shout hallelujah if that happened. It kept happening. Yeah, not one. I just want to make sure it wasn't a slow reaction. Well, that's no fair. If perfect sudden life if sudden perfect life isn't part of the bargain, why am I doing this? And we get a clue from Luke. Because sudden perfect life would have been to take that fantastic catch of fish and sell it. Buy bigger boats, buy bigger nets, reinvest in the business, keep going, right? But the response to Jesus was to walk away from that, knowing there would be challenges ahead, but knowing now that the master of the universe, the master of the seas, the one that can give miraculous gifts, is now in charge. Does it mean everything will be perfect? Yes and no. Actually, I guess I should say yes and yes, like I did with Is Jesus God? Yes and yes. When we are perfectly in step with God's perfect desire and future story for us, life is miraculous and wonderful and great. And thank God when we step out of line, instead of it being a big slap across the head, God nudges us back toward that perfect path. We don't always respond, right? Because our story, like this story, is filled with improbable scenarios. We don't see God's desire for us, calling us constantly toward a hopeful future. Let me put it this way. How many of you have heard the phrase, hindsight is 20/20? Have you heard that? You probably said it, right? We all kind of have. When we look back at a situation and see what we coulda, shoulda, woulda, we know what we coulda, shoulda, woulda. And I believe when we look back at our life one day, with the guidance of the holy God who created the universe and created each of you and is crazy about each one of you, we will, like I said on the map, find ourselves going, oh, now I get it. Now I see where I missed my opportunity. Now where I see where you were offering me a chance and I missed it. Where I fell out of step. Where I missed that chance to be in perfect harmony with your desire, not only for me, but for the whole world. It all starts with a simple response. Saying yes to Jesus before you expect the miracle to happen. but then to keep saying yes, just like Simon did. He could have said no when Jesus first walked up. He could have said no to getting in the boat. He could have said no to pushing the boat out. He could have said no to casting the nets. And he could have said no to following Jesus. Say yes. Say yes to the promise of a life filled with improbable scenarios of blessing. And let Jesus get to work. But look out. You're going to need a bigger net. Amen.